If you're driving through South Yorkshire, there's one stretch of road that's earned a reputation so terrifying, even police have been called out by traumatised witnesses multiple times. It's called the Stocksbridge Bypass, and after hearing these horrifying accounts, you'll understand why some locals say that you should never drive it alone after dark. Since before the bypass was even opened, people have seen things that should be impossible, and some have even quit their jobs rather than face another shift out here in the dark. Police officers, security guards, and everyday commuters have all seen unexplainable things. Faceless figures, children singing and playing in the dead of night, and shadows that watch you from the side of the road. Or even worse, from the back seat of your own car. But with all of this terrifying activity reported along the Stocksbridge Bypass, where did it all start? Where has it all come from? And who or what is haunting this infamous road? After everything I've read about this week, there is no way that you would catch me driving this road alone at night. So buckle up. Did you see what I did there? You are in for a ride with this one. So the particular road in question is located about half an hour northwest of Sheffield, South Yorkshire, and it was built to basically ease the traffic passing through Stocksbridge and Deepcar to bypass them. But before the £14 million project was even complete, weird things were reported in the area, which would basically just kick off the reputation that the Stocksbridge Bypass would hold on to this day, really. Because while the bypass was still being built, on the 8th of September 1987, there were two security guards, David Goldthorpe and Stephen Brooks, who were on night duty patrolling the construction site, making sure everything was in order. It got to be around 11:30 at night, so completely dark, and they'd just reached the area that would eventually be Peroid Bridge. And while they were there, they could just hear something, voices just carrying on the wind, and they sounded like kids' voices, laughing and playing. Completely not out of place in broad daylight, but that late at night, on a construction site, not the sort of thing that you should be hearing. They drove up towards the pylon that's nearby, basically one of those huge metal towers that hold up the power lines, to find that, yeah, their ears weren't deceiving them. There was a group of children playing around this pylon at 11:30 at night, effectively in the middle of nowhere. There were no houses around for quite a while, really. But as they watched these kids playing from the car for a second, what became abundantly clear was that they were not wearing clothes that were normal for that time. They definitely stood out to be old-fashioned. Deciding that enough was enough, the presence of the security guards hadn't been enough for the kids to stop playing or anything, David and Stephen decided to confront them. Sort of along the lines of, where are your parents? You shouldn't be out playing on a construction site, it's dangerous, and it's also way too late for you to be outside right now. But as the two men got out of the car and started to walk towards them, the children just vanished. They were there 1 minute, and then they were just gone. They didn't run away into the nearby trees, they didn't go hide, they were just not there anymore. Okay, so now you can sometimes see things that aren't there, brain playing tricks on you kind of thing when you're on a night shift, but both guys saw these kids, and both of them had heard them laughing and playing minutes before that. As they carried on walking towards the pylon where the children most definitely had been playing, they looked around them for clues as to where on earth they could have disappeared to find that there were no footprints or anything in the mud around where these kids had just been. And so, just left completely scratching their heads at that point, David and Stephen just headed back to their car, absolutely bewildered. Like, what had just happened? But the weirdness wasn't done there. A little bit later on, actually around the same area, the security guards had come back around on their patrol again, and they looked up at Peroid Bridge from the bypass. And standing there, towering above them, was the unmistakable figure of a man. They could see that he was looking down at them, only they couldn't make out much detail. Okay, disappearing kids, and now this guy standing on the bridge. They were starting to think that someone was kind of having them on at this point, like it's got to be a prank now. Stephen told David at that point, look, I'm gonna get out of the car and I'm gonna keep this guy in my sights while you drive round to the bridge and shine your headlights on him and we'll just catch this joker. Because the bridge wasn't actually accessible from the bypass at that point. They hadn't got that far in the construction. And so they did just that. Stephen stood there on his own on the incomplete bypass, watching the figure on the bridge. There was a moon out that night, but it was a pretty cloudy night, so not a huge amount of light. And man, those those minutes while you're just waiting for David to get to the bridge, standing in pretty much complete darkness alone. Well, obviously, apart from your new friend up there on the bridge being all creepy and that, but that wait must have felt like hours. My brain would have been making up all sorts of shapes and then scenarios, but eventually David did make it onto the bridge and shone his headlights onto where the figure was still standing watching. But what they both saw, Stephen from the bypass and David from the car on the bridge, traumatized these two men. They saw that this figure was wrapped in a long black cloak, but the figure had no head. Oh yeah, and the car's headlights did illuminate the shape, but also the light was passing straight through its body. So that's cool. After a few moments, enough for the two men to be absolutely transfixed with fear at what they were seeing, the figure, similarly to the children, just completely vanished. That was it. That was enough for both of them. David raced round and picked Stephen up in the car, and they just headed straight for the security office, where they both sat in complete hysterics. When they told their boss about what they'd encountered, the boss had no reason not to believe them. They were both experienced, down-to-earth Yorkshire lads. One was a rugby player, the other one was a weightlifter, but after what they'd experienced on the 8th of September, their nerves were completely gone. So their boss did actually call the police about it. Like, these guys weren't prone to making stuff like this up. They were experienced night security guys. Like, it was worth a call, even just to get another opinion kind of thing. But I'm sure you can imagine telling that kind of story to a police officer, you're going to get a pretty bemused response back, which is exactly what happened. They were advised maybe a priest is what you need for those lads first. But just going to show how seriously the security guys took the whole thing, later on, PC Dick Ellis received a call from a priest asking, oh, would you mind helping me out? Because I have two very large and very frightened security guards in my church who are refusing to leave unless I perform an exorcism on a construction site. Okay, well, maybe after that call, it might be worth just a quick look just to see what we can see. So a couple of nights later, on the 11th of September 1987, PC Dick Ellis and Special Constable John Beat went out to investigate the building site. And yeah, they're soon gonna be less bemused at David and Stephen's account. 20 minutes into having a look around the site and having not come across anything, they decided, oh, you know what, there's nothing going on here. And so they just went to get back in their patrol car. They had seen a shape moving about weirdly, but on investigation, they deduced that it was actually just a piece of plastic flapping about. As the officers had expected, up to that point, no ghostly children had been seen, no headless figures or anything like that. But as they were sat, about to start the car and drive off, an overwhelming sensation just engulfed PC Ellis. He did have his car window open, but it wasn't a breeze or anything like that. He claimed that it felt like someone had just walked over his grave. You know that shivering, cold down to your bones kind of dreadful feeling? That happened, but he couldn't figure out why. He slowly turned towards his open window just to see if there was anything out there, and yeah, there was. All he could see was the outline of a torso, completely blocking his window, as if someone was standing right next to the car. But before he could react, in a millisecond, the torso was gone. But then John smacked his arm to get his attention, and the figure was at his window now instead, as if the figure had swapped from one side of the car to the other in a fraction of a second. John was able to describe the figure in a little more detail, claiming that it looked like something out of a Dickens novel, wearing a waistcoat and a cravat. But John saw the face too, just leaning down into the window, staring at him. I don't get full body chills very often when I'm researching stories, but just the thought of one policeman seeing the figure and then it flitting to the other policeman's side of the car in an instant and staring at him through the window while on a pretty much deserted building site, no lights, no safety, no one to hear you scream if it all goes south. Damn, nightmares. John, being an experienced police officer though, he tried to focus on the face, tried to get a good look, but just as quickly as the figure had appeared, it was gone again. Well, that was enough. Let's get out of here. It sounds like a mighty fine idea. Only problem was, just at that super convenient moment, the car refused to start. Oh good, we're trapped in the middle of nowhere with a teleporting ghost. Cool. As they were still trying and failing to get the car going, they started hearing banging sounds, as if someone was attacking the car with a baseball bat or something. This thing, whatever it was getting violent, or at least doing the most to frighten these guys. After several agonizing minutes, the car finally roared into life though, and the police officers were able to escape from whatever was stalking them. Apparently, once back at the station, they did make an official report, but according to a Freedom of Information request, this report was either either destroyed, never filed, or never existed in the first place. But there is a guy called Dr. David Clark who has done a lot of work on this case, and he's actually interviewed both police officers and so has their testimony recorded, and it's something that they stand by, that thing happened to them. As for David and Stephen, the security guards, both of them quit their jobs, with one of them emigrating to Canada, never working security again. And I feel like security guards on the night shift, that's when you experience the weirdest stuff. I know tiredness and things might play a part, but just as an example, the number of security guys from Alton Towers that got in contact with me with their own experiences after that episode that I shared. Forget being a paranormal investigator, just get a job as a night security guard. But the police and security, they weren't the only ones to encounter things that they couldn't explain while Stocksbridge Bypass was being built. The builders who were staying in caravans near to the site, they would commonly hear children. And there was a guy called John Holmes who was working in a lorry depot right by the construction site. He claimed that sometimes you could hear children singing, never clear enough to figure out what they were actually singing, but it would continue, off and on, all through the night. Not only that, but any time you'd have to be out there during the night, you would get that intense feeling that you were definitely being watched by something that didn't want you to see it. Just all around, creepy. 3 a.m, trying to do your job, and you can just hear kids singing from the tree line. I know how horror movies start, you can't fool me. Eventually though, the bypass was complete, and on Friday the 13th of May 1988, because of course it was Friday the 13th, the Stocksbridge Bypass opened up to the public, and pretty much immediately it gained a reputation of a different sort when the first fatal collision on the road happened on the 24th of August, literally just over 3 months after opening, with 24 more people dying on that stretch of road in the next 14 years. People started calling Stocksbridge Bypass the Killer Road or the Death Road, being referred to as an accident black spot, because the bypass appeared safer to overtake than it actually was and things like that, and so head-on collisions seemed relatively quite common. Interestingly though, South Yorkshire police maintain that it's no dangerous than any other road. But even aside from that, the road has now had safety improvements done to it, there are speed cameras now, and fatalities have got less frequent than they initially were, but none of that seems to have really made a difference with how people talk about the bypass, because, let's be honest, that's not going to get in the way of a good ghost story, am I right? And Stocksbridge Bypass was actually referred to as being jinxed in the newspapers as quickly as 1989, just the year after opening. And as travellers used the road, more and more reports of strange phenomena started rolling in from terrified drivers. The ghostly children were still being seen. In March 1995, a woman called Pat Heathcote saw what she described as 8 children dancing around an invisible maypole near Peroid Bridge, where the security guys saw them. But it seems that they also do travel along the stretch of road, as just a few weeks after that, Barbara Lee, the landlady of the Mid-Hopestons Arms, as it was known then, what I think is now the old Mustard Pot, a pub in the area, she saw these children again at night, happy as anything, dancing around in a circle. She described their outfits in a little more detail though, saying that the boys were wearing breeches and the girls were wearing white pinafores and mob caps, basically like an old style bonnet that young girls in the late 18th century, early 19th century kind of time would have worn. But even on the bypass itself, people claim to hear the disembodied sounds of children laughing and playing, and some saying that the kids are singing Ringa Ringa Roses, which, could you think of a creepier song to be singing in the middle of the night? But those kind of claims seem to come from a friend of a friend. My mate down the pub said his cousin's wife's sister's dog saw this. Kind of unverified claims, so it may be that it's a detail that's been filled in over the years. Because Stephen and David, the 2 security guys, and John, who worked at the lorry depot, none of them could make out what they were actually singing, and Ringa Ringa Roses is a pretty recognisable tune, so you'd think that that would have been a detail that they would have included. So yeah, up to you on that one. Some people have tried to figure out who these children were and why they're still haunting this area. One explanation is that they were working down a mine in the area and there was a disaster and that's how they were killed, but there's no record of anything like that happening. Another explanation was that they were killed when a cart overturned, but again, no evidence of that being the case, so really we don't know. But alongside the children, this figure in a cloak has been seen again after the initial reports, although from what I can tell, not as a headless man. He's described as actually being a monk, wearing a black monk's habit by most people who have seen him after the bypass opened, but he's still mostly spotted standing on that Peroid Bridge, just watching. But then other times, the figure is seen walking on the side of the road or just in the general area. But that if you have the misfortune to come into close quarters with this entity, as some people have, which I'll tell you about later because it's going to get a whole lot worse, you will be hit with this stench of old, musty books. And not in a, oh, I just love going to a secondhand bookshop and smelling the old books kind of way. More in a, oh man, these books have been rotting in the ground for a while, huh? There was one account from 1990 where a lorry driver had pulled off the bypass and was untying the ropes on his trailer when he got an uneasy feeling of dread. And alongside that, besides being outside, he was very aware of that fusty, mildewy smell out of nowhere. Feeling a little disconcerted, after just being totally fine a second ago, he looked up to see this dark figure gliding across the front of his lorry, illuminated only by the lorry's headlights. Woof, okay. You're alone, it's dark, you're feeling all types of uneasy, and you see something like that. Just a dark figure shape gliding noiselessly. That mental image alone is enough to give me goosebumps. I would have noped so hard. But what can you even do? Your trailer is half unfastened, you're in the middle of nowhere, there's nowhere for you to go. I feel like that somehow makes it worse. And again, similarly to the children, attempts have been made to try and explain who he is, why he's haunting this area, what business does he have going around creeping people out like this. And again, there are a few explanations offered. Some say that there was a local abbey that kicked a monk out for breaking his vows, and when he died, he was buried in unconsecrated ground. And then when the bypass was being built, his grave was disturbed. Others say he was killed by soldiers as he was travelling to a cottage to perform a secret mass, presumably during a time where it was a big no-no to be a Catholic in England. But that encounter with the two security guards, that seems to be far from the first time that this entity was even seen. Because there was a story that a long time ago, way before the bypass was even being discussed, a woman who lived in one of the farm cottages near to where the bypass now runs through, she often saw a ghostly monk. But again, similarly to the children, we have no concrete historical record of even an abbey being in the area for him to get kicked out of, no talk of the construction company disturbing any graves while they were building the bypass, anything like that. And so, I don't know. I mean, the police officers back in 1987, they didn't describe this guy as a monk. He was wearing a waistcoat and cravat. And this next witness report has some striking similarities, really, because there was a guy called Graham Brooke who was out jogging with his 14-year-old son Nigel in 1987. So again, before the road had opened. And it was around dusk time, so not completely dark, but you know, getting there. And he claimed that they saw the figure of a guy walking down the middle of the road. But straight away, something about him just felt off. Graham said he just couldn't process what he was looking at. The bloke was dressed head to toe in 18th, 19th century clothing with a dark brown hood and a long cape that looked like it had been lived in for a while. The detail though was unreal. Graham could see every button running down the cape. The old bag that he was holding had a chain on it and it was almost slithering along the ground, rattling as the man walked. And Nigel, his son, saw it too, and at the exact same moment, both of them just froze. That feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end, they both felt that. And Graham swears the air turned thick with the smell of must and old books, which we've heard that once or twice. They were only about 50 yards away from this guy, and he looked so real that Graham said that he could have walked right up and tapped him on the shoulder. But then out of nowhere, a lorry came into view with its headlights blazing, and just like that, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Graham and Nigel standing just absolutely stunned in the middle of the road, asking each other if they really had just seen what they thought that they had saw. So I don't know. The old musty smell tracks, and maybe because it was lighter, they could see this entity in more detail, or was it someone else entirely? Who knows, really? But if you survive your night drive along Stocksbridge Bypass without spotting any phantom kids or funky smelling monks, you can't breathe a sigh of relief just yet, because there are a lot more encounters that people have claimed over the years, and not just on the bypass itself, but really, it does span the general area. It just seems like a real hotspot for strangeness. There's a woman in white who's been seen walking along the side of the road, wearing this flowing white dress and looking down at the ground in front of her, hair kind of draping over her face. And there was one time when a motorbiker who was riding along the bypass late one night said that he saw this woman who was on his side of the road, walking towards him, head down, just walking. He passed her, and as he did that, he went to look behind him over his shoulder, as it was a bit strange seeing a woman walking alone down a very quiet, very dark road like that. But as he turned to look, she was gone. The road behind him was empty, not a living soul that he could see back in the direction that he'd just come from. Okay, very perplexed in that case. He carried on riding though, and a bit further up he spotted a police patrol car, so he just pulled over because, yeah, he was a bit concerned. And so he just asked the officers, "Oh, I don't suppose you've seen a woman in a white dress walking on the side of the road, have you?" No sir, the police officers hadn't seen anything. But there was nowhere for her to have joined the bypass. She must have walked past the police to have got to the point where the biker saw her. They're very strange. But other people who have seen this entity, they claim that if they slow down their car, about to offer her a lift, I mean, she is a woman walking alone on a quiet road late at night, she just fades away into nothingness. And sometimes the figures seen aren't human at all. People have claimed to see everything from ghostly horses crossing the road when they don't have enough time to brake, so they just go straight through this figure, but obviously they don't hit anything. Right through to Stocksbridge Bypass's very own Black Shuck type folklore character, known in Yorkshire as a bar guest. Basically a large black ghostly dog, who's again been seen walking along the main road or running across the fields near to the bypass. And I would love to hear more information on that one though, as a lot of times these black dogs, when they're seen, they're an omen of death or misfortune. But I couldn't find any more specific reports that went into any more detail, specific witness accounts that said that they saw this black dog and then this misfortune befell them, so that would be interesting to know. But then sometimes there are full-on actual ghostly vehicles spotted on Stocksbridge Bypass. Some have witnessed an old-fashioned horse-drawn Vardo, a traditional Romany caravan, travelling along the road, but it fades away before reaching the horizon. And then others have seen a stagecoach instead, with a bit of a legend surrounding it. It was said that way back in the day there was a stagecoach which crashed, and it was a horrific thing. It killed everyone on board. And ever since then, people in the area would hear the sounds of horses' hooves furiously galloping before seeing the infamous stagecoach being driven by the undead. So that's the story, that's definitely the legend, regardless of us having no information on a particular crash, no record or what have you. But this hasn't stopped drivers to this day from seeing this phantom stagecoach on the bypass. And so as I was going through this research, it seemed like there were a lot of legends tied to the Stocksbridge Bypass, a lot of things that allegedly and supposedly happened a long time ago, but no record of it. And so when you're driving along a particularly creepy road and you're hearing sounds and seeing things from the safety of your car, that is one thing. But then the amount of drivers who claimed that someone or something would step out on the road in front of them and cause them to have to swerve their car to avoid hitting them was just on a whole other level. Some people were able to slow down when they saw whatever it was up ahead, others swerved when they didn't see it in time, and then there were other drivers who had no time to react and ended up driving through whatever it was that walked out onto the road. But every single time, as they look in their rearview mirror to see what on earth it was stepping into the road, there's never anything out of place behind them. Completely empty. And some of these encounters, they happen in broad daylight too. Like when a couple, Judy and David Simpson, spotted a man and he was running in the field next to the road. And he was sprinting and waving his arms around like he was trying to flag down some help, or at least trying to warn them of something. But before they could even process what was going on, what he could possibly be trying to warn them about, he legged it up the embankment and floated out into the middle of the road right in front of their car. There was absolutely no time to react, and so their car just sailed through this guy. Obviously they anchored on, the car skidded to a halt, but when they looked back, there was nothing. No sign of anyone on the road behind them, absolutely no explanation for what they had both witnessed. But then in the evening on New Year's Eve in 1997, there was another couple, Paul and Jane Ford, and they were driving along the bypass when Paul spotted someone standing dead in the middle of the road right ahead of them. He slammed on the brakes and swerved to avoid hitting whoever, whatever it was, but this sudden evasive movement caused the car to spin out of control. Jane grabbed the steering wheel and somehow they avoided crashing into anything or skidding off the road entirely, but when they pulled the car over, obviously they were both thoroughly rattled. Jane maintains to this day that if she hadn't been there to grab the steering wheel, Paul could have been seriously hurt or even killed. And Paul, he refuses to drive on that stretch of road anymore. Which, I mean, yeah, totally fair enough, really. But if stepping in front of your car wasn't bad enough, haha, gets even worse if you can imagine it. Because sometimes the ghosts will hitch a ride in the car with you. How fun does that sound? Can't escape. sleep in a moving metal box on your own in the dark with a ghost very close to you. Oh, what fun. I'm being sarcastic if you can't tell. The main one that gets reported is back to our pal the monk, or at least the fusty, musty and dusty robed figure. And the reason this story really took off as him being a monk seems to be in part down to the TV show Strange But True back in 1994, hosted by Michael Aspel. A lot of people appear to have very fond memories of watching it, but in that episode, they interviewed a psychic medium who claimed that while driving along the bypass, she suddenly felt the presence of a dark-robed figure sitting next to her in the passenger seat. And she also seems to be the one that really pushed the idea that this entity's grave had been disturbed by the construction of the bypass. Because according to her, the entity told her that he'd been dead for 500 years and wasn't at peace because his final resting place had been disrupted. She went on to say that that wasn't the only encounter that she'd had with this ghost either. She claimed that on a different occasion, while she was driving along, she saw the robed figure materialise in someone else's car in front of her, but when she overtook the car, the figure disappeared. Other drivers report getting the sense that someone has joined them in the car, even though they haven't picked up a hitchhiker or anything like that. And one reported that oh so familiar smell of musty old books. Another said that while they couldn't see anything, their radio switched on and started just emitting these crackling sounds, even when no one had been near any of the buttons to switch the radio on or anything like that. But then there was one driver, whose story I came across, who said that when he looked in the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of not a robed figure, but an older woman who had her hands clasped together like she was praying. And so that's a little bit of a different one there. No more details. I'm not sure if she's been seen by other people either, but sometimes it's just not what you see on Stocksbridge Bypass, it's just what you feel. Lots of people claimed that intense feeling of being watched even while they're driving alone at night, and then when you're parked up, that can all amplify. Drivers who park up in the laybys feel like their car is being smacked from the outside or even pushed by something unseen. Other times, especially near Peabroyd Bridge, cars can just all of a sudden lose power, electrics, engine, everything. But then when you push your car off the bridge, everything's fine and it all comes back to life. But I mean, Stocksbridge Bypass, and quite clearly from the stories, the general area and the fields surrounding it, the roads around before the bypass was built, really does seem like it is a hotspot for this strange and frankly utterly terrifying activity. But why? Why this road? Why this area? And maybe that's got something to do with why people continue to talk about this one, because the fact is, no one really knows. There's no definite, I say definite, but like really something that makes sense. There's no reason why. From what we can see, there wasn't a terrible tragedy that took place in the area at some point in history. The construction of the bypass didn't disturb any human remains or anything. We just don't have something that we can point to and go, yeah, that's probably it, with any degree of certainty like we do with anything else in the paranormal. So really, it is just best guesses that we're working with. Maybe it's something to do with the amount of fatalities on this road in such a short space of time, but that doesn't explain what happened pre-bypass opening. Maybe there was a disaster here before records, newspaper reports, anything like that was really a thing. Maybe it could be something older, ancient even, like the way that Avebury Stone Circle, somewhere else that we've chatted about before, is said to be responsible for at least amplifying the paranormal activity there. Or maybe, and this is quite possibly my favourite theory, it could be rooted in old folklore. Actually more Irish folklore than British, but that hasn't stopped people from seeing similarities and suggesting that maybe it might have something to do with it. I'm talking about fairies, and more specifically, disturbing places where the fair folk are said to be. Because there was a famous story in 1999 about a motorway in County Clare, Ireland, that was moved so that a fairy bush wouldn't have to be destroyed, with a guy called Eddie Lenihan, an Irish author and storyteller, behind the push for authorities to reroute the road and preserve the fairy bush. Because the legend goes that if you build directly over something like that, you're basically just asking for trouble. Accidents, strange things going on, all that sort of stuff. And so that sounds quite familiar, so some people started thinking that maybe something like that could have happened in South Yorkshire. Because after the bypass was built, lots of accidents, I think it's fair to say there was plenty of strange things going on. But honestly, everything is just speculation at this point. Maybe it's just the power of suggestion, the darkness, the isolation, and knowing you're driving on a bad road with a bad reputation. Maybe there really is something else at play here. So while we may not know why Stocksbridge Bypass is such a hotspot for strangeness, and we can sit here thinking about it until the cows come home, but out there, on that road, people are still experiencing weird things to this day. Phantom passengers, disappearing pedestrians, ghostly children, and an overwhelming fear feeling that something's not quite right. So if you ever find yourself driving along the Stocksbridge Bypass alone, especially after dark, don't be surprised if you get that feeling like you're not alone after all. Because on this road, whatever's out there is probably watching you too. Oh, wow, so this was another topic that came highly requested, and I am so glad that I was able to cover it. What a strange little ghostly ecosystem this place has got. I know that a lot of people would have first heard of the hauntings of Stocksbridge Bypass from the episode of Strange But True. Based on the comments on YouTube, it's a very nostalgic thing for a lot of people. But if you've ever had a strange experience on the bypass yourself, something you couldn't explain, I would absolutely love to hear about it. So please do tell us in the comments if you'd be up for it. This one was so interesting to cover. I definitely think there is something going on here. It's being haunted by something. There are too many people over the years who have seen something, to the extent that they swerve their cars to avoid it. I do think, however, for a lot of these ghost stories, the explanations for them seem to just be legend more than anything concrete, anything rooted in historical evidence. But that absolutely doesn't mean that something strange can't be going on here at all. But you know me, I'm nosy. I like to get to the root of the story. I do want to know who this dapper gent in the waistcoat is who needs to put his cloak in the wash though. The one that scared the bejesus out of the two policemen, because if he is the main character, surely there's got to be a story there. It is possible that he could be a monk instead. There were monastic farms in the area, farms owned and run by the monasteries, but that sort of character wouldn't have been wearing a 19th century waistcoat and cravat, so yeah. It is also worth saying too, apparently some people do dress up and go around scaring people on the bypass, knowing the stories and such, so there is that. And also I read it is also potentially an active dogging spot, so if you hear weird noises in that sense, likely not a ghost. But as always, let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed this video, please do let me know by hitting the like button, and if you haven't already, maybe you'd like to subscribe to my channel too. I bring haunted history to your beautiful faces every week. But anyway, that is all from me today. Go and get a drink of water. The last thing you need if your car breaks down on P-Royd Bridge is to be dehydrated on top of that. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. It's not even that warm today. It's not a heat wave or anything. This is just me complaining about the heat. Ugh.